one of those really interesting individuals who was bitten by the international bug very early. He studied at the high school level in the US. He spent time at college or law school in the US. And he has had quite a successful career in politics, first serving in the Landtag in Hamburg, and now in the Bundestag, where he is one of the few candidates, the only candidate, who won the Direktmandat. One of the few.
In Hamburg?
In Hamburg.
No, we won 4 out of 6.
Okay, so that's pretty good.
But so the numbers are the best in Hamburg.
So the Social Democrats are flying high. And I thought that it would be a terrific opportunity to have Metin come and talk with us, because we are all following the events and developments in Ukraine very, very closely. We've all seen that since the end of February, there really has been a major policy shift in Germany, the so-called Zeitenwende, where Chancellor Olaf Scholz delivered a major speech before the Bundestag and really set out some major new guidelines that even went contrary to some of the traditional tenets of the Social Democratic Party in the past. And of course, we're now more than a month into the war in Ukraine. And so I thought we could just start generally by getting your assessment of Germany's response to the war in Ukraine, and then have a conversation.
Well, thanks, Steve. Finally, thanks to the Deutsche Bank. Thanks, great location. The viewers on Zoom do not see what I can see here outside. So it's just half the fun. You have to stop by at some time and take a view on this one. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
The occasion, well, the reason for us meeting here is the war in Ukraine. So let's not forget that. That's a tragedy for the people of Ukraine. It is a catastrophe for the entire security architecture as we know it for Europe at this point. Probably it's destroyed forever. I would describe it as a status quo today. And at the end, probably we might have time to talk about the future of how to not rebuild, but building up something new, and what the role of the transatlantic community is on that one. But you asked me for the reaction on the war. Well, technically, it was a speech from Olaf Scholz in Sunday, February 27th. A special occasion, a special reason. Sunday, I think we have never had a special session of Bundestag during the weekend. So everybody drives to Berlin from everywhere from the country. You don't have session a week. You just do that for one single speech. We had a break of 3 weeks of recess of session week. So within those 3 weeks, the war happened, the attack happened, and the speech happened, which makes the whole thing more important. But I think it is important to see what was before the attack, Steve, to answer your question properly. The election of the Bundestag was in September last year. The coalition came together in I would say on a very short period of time. There was a coalition treaty on that one. And of course, we have this special situation technically that's a three-party coalition, so-called traffic light coalition of liberals, greens, and social democrats. And for our American friends and everybody worldwide, I would say so foreign policy was not the first issue we were talking about of changes within the government after we took over from the CDU, the chancellery. Because there was the expectations were there is some sort of continuity from Angela Merkel to Olaf Scholz. I do not want to go into detail about the history and the DNA of foreign policy and security policy of the Green Party, of the Social Democratic Party, and the Liberals. But if anybody would have thought there will be a big war in continental Europe when the coalition treaty was signed, people would have argued, well, maybe it's not the best idea for those three parties to get together. It could be too many possible breaking points within the party base of the Green Party, the party base of the Social Democrats. But we didn't know that the war would be coming, so we took the chance. And saying that, we had a time before that speech We had the time since Thursday before. Thursday was the attack, February 24th. And we had the time before the attack where we had big discussions. Remember that about sanctioning, because the military buildup took weeks, months almost. So we had a lengthy period of talking what to do with this aggression of Russia, which was an aggression even before the war actually started. And you remember the United States had weapons delivery to Ukraine before the attack. The United Kingdom had weapons delivery before the attack. We had this Nord Stream 2 debate super intensively within Germany. So all the elements actually were already on the table without a shot being fired. Well, no, shots have been fired since 2014 in eastern Ukraine. So, but when this war, as it is today, started, as you all know, Ukrainians and myself would say, no, the war started a lot earlier, but this campaign, as I would say at this point, with 140,000 troops being muscled up at the border, that started in February this year. So, so we had all those good social democratic discussions about weapon delivery, about Nord Stream 2, even before. I remember that the Munich Security Conference, Steve, we met there last time before the war, was the weekend before the Russian attack happened. Mm-hmm. So I remember 2 weeks prior to that, I traveled to Ukraine, to Kiev. And that was not really an easy trip for a social democrat in that situation, obviously being asked about weapon delivery and being an ally in the Western Front and not supporting at this point the United Kingdom and the US and in terms of weapon delivery, Nord Stream 2 and further sanctions. It seemed to me a little further away now because everything has changed overnight. The moment the shot got fired on February 24th, obviously everything changed. Everything's changed so much that this coalition of Green Party, Social Democratic Party, could do this super big change in foreign policy. So if you look at that speech, Steve, which is, I would say, it's historic in the history of my country that any head of state, any head of government that's ever held, you have 5 points to it. So a lot of people are just talking about the 100 billion euro program for defense, but let's see what the 5 points are, because on all 5 points there will be major changes, not on brand new subjects, but the consequences of the war starting on those 5. One is energy independence. So that was a super big issue before the war. Obviously, this coalition had a program to switch within, I would say, a decade to renewable energy. We had this discussion, is that possible with this big industrial production portion of our economy? We had a lot of campaigning about it, and then it basically ended up in a coalition to say we are getting independent on fossil fuel from outside. So, but obviously this event of the war speeded this whole process up and made it even for those who wouldn't have agreed on that point too much before the war as being maybe economically not really the best idea to do. So it won arguments overnight to do so and to do it faster. The second one is the support of the eastern flank of NATO. We had a debate about the enhanced forward presence. You remember 2014, basically Russia, I would say, not in accordance with international law and not technically contracts, but agreements on how to secure the center and eastern part of Europe and not making it a place of next Cold War arms race. We had some successes with dealing out a modus vivendi, I would say, with the Russian Federation. That obviously blew up in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. And we as NATO responded to I would say, the moderate idea of enhanced forward presence. 500 German soldiers in the Baltic, so a lot less numbers than 140,000 Russian troops in Ukraine, but a particular gathering of over 24 NATO members at the eastern flank to have this effect of not securing NATO territory, but making it a super big price tag in case of an attack, killing Belgian troops, German troops, Netherlands, US, Canada, everybody on board. That was enhanced forward presence. And we had that before, but now we started to do even more. The NATO response force was activated, which is 5,000 troops compared to 500 now in the Baltic. For German standards, we had to support out of 50,000, 13,300 troops are from Germany. If we're going to details of that, I assume if we would have to send every single one of those 13,300 within the next 3 or 4 weeks, we might be able to do so, but then that's about the limit of the armed forces of Germany at this point on the ground, I would say. But we did that immediately. The third point is this, there was a second support of NATO eastern flank, is obviously the sanction regime on Russia, which in the future books will be written about this. I've never seen anything like this before. I've done some work on the Iranian case and sanctioning the Iranian system. This is not a comparison. This is a very unique effort of not only the West, not only NATO, but more or less the world community to put an immense economic pressure on the Russian Federation. And I'm not too sure if we have the time today to talk about the future. I'm not sure that everybody understood what this does to the Russian Federation and what it will do in the future. It is very, very intense, and it will be very intense for the future. The fourth one is the support of Ukraine. So the decision was made actually to deliver weapons the day after the attack on Friday, but then it was publicly announced by the Chancellor on that Sunday speech to deliver weapons, which is for Germany. I put it in technical terms. We do have a law actually not to send weapons into Spannungsgebiete. What is Spannungsgebiet in English?
Areas of tension, areas of conflict.
Areas of conflict. Why would you send weapons in areas where there's no conflict? I would ask it. So we've done that before. There were exceptions in the past to that, but now it's obviously not the criteria is not whether there are tensions or not where we send them, but whether it's our political will to do so. So it's about our interests sending weapons, our ideas, our principles. That is totally new in German thinking, foreign policy. And the fifth is, of course, the 100 billion euro program. If you look at all those 5 issues combined, Steve, it is an expression of reacting to a very big enemy, I would say, just by size of the Russian Federation. But it is also an expression of changing from the inside in our system of how to not only to respond to an action, but to cope with the challenges of the future of taking responsibility, to being willing, and then in the future being able to deal with that responsibility on the German side. And that is to everybody who knows Germany, knows German foreign policy, knows how I'm not saying how it's not pacifist, it's more passive, I would say, and there's a difference to it. That this general passive stand, which has changed in the last years, the last decades, but it has taken a big step forward in that regard. And that's a lot of Americans are congratulated me personally for doing so. I said I didn't do it. Olaf Scholz said it. But at the same time, it's also very problematic for a lot of Germans seeing that our concept of more or less feeling to be a bystander, just feeling of not getting into a conflict, but basically trying to get out, which was not really true technically, because we were involved in NATO, we had a good out of area. But I'm talking about the national character, your own self-esteem of who you are. What's the difference between being German and being in the United States, being a US citizen and towards foreign policy. That is a fundamental change, not only in the government of Germany, but the people of Germany. And the speech was super important. And then I'm finished with this because it was a very important, very important point of time for our country. It wasn't only a major decision made by the chancellor. It was also the moment of change within the German society because, and this is technically proven, this speech was recognized by over 2/3 of the German population of being the right answer in the right time. The two facts together make it to this watershed moment. I don't like that translation. To this special moment in time for our country.
But I do think it's even if you don't call it a watershed moment, one can certainly call it a tectonic shift or a seismic shift in German foreign security and energy policy. And I guess one of the questions that many people in the US have is it here to stay? So maybe a little bit more briefly than your last input. How convinced are you that it's here to stay, given the level of support of this government and, as you just said, of the public?
Okay, very short, as short as possible. Things are changing in democracy. So population wants to go to war in a certain instant and want to pull out its sex. So that happens. Just two elements of why I doubt that there will be a back to normal to square one before the attack. First of all, technically, we're going to amend the constitution about the 100 billion euros. So we will not go into an infight in every fiscal year about fighting about the other budgets of all the other departments. It will be a special fund to spend for the security reason. But unfortunately, the second point is more convincing. Russia will not change. Russia will not change. Not in a speed and in intensity that it would change the public opinion of the West fundamentally back to where we were before. I don't see how that would happen. Even if you had a big peace treaty, even if you really, if all the sanctions about this, Russia itself, I'm not talking about the government. I'm not talking about Putin. The countries. If to have a real partner for the future, so many things would have to change under so fundamentally in that society. I'm not a Russian expert. I've traveled. I was part of the Petersburg dialogue. We traveled there several times to Moscow in this dialogue processes, so-called dialogue. They have a long way to go. And as long as that is not a trustworthy situation for everybody, and I expect Ukraine will be suffering from that situation for a long time, even after the war will have ended, hopefully soon. That's why there will be no turning back.
Yep.
I don't see that.
So obviously, we could spend all of the time that we have together just talking about Ukraine, about Germany's response, the nuances, and we can get into some of that during the Q&A. But I know that there are a number of people who are with us today who are also interested in China. And you just came from a conference in Washington that focused on China. And I guess one of the questions that I've been grappling with is this new awakening in Germany, this new sort of Weltanschauung, this new view of the world that has been brought on because of the war in Ukraine and because of Russia's aggression. How is that affecting the way that Germans look at China? And one of the reasons why I'm asking about that is because we've all been hearing about, we've all been talking about the interdependency between Germany and Russia when it comes to energy. And of course, when it comes to the global economy and global supply chains, and the success of many German companies that build the backbone of Germany's economy, one could argue that there is a similar kind of mutual dependency between China and Berlin, perhaps even bigger. And so I'm curious, to the degree that you can talk about what was discussed at the conference, but also what you're picking up on the ground. Are people thinking differently about China? And the debate, and this is, well, let me just leave it at that, and then maybe I'll ask another question before I open it up to all of you.
Well, obviously, China debate is a super big debate. So it's There was a situation before the war that the policy question on China was super big and what everybody discussed in the United States and in Germany more not. It wasn't left out, but it was not as it wasn't in the center of the policy debate as it is in the United States. That it's still the case. So China is not as important for our foreign policy that it is for the United States. It's still the case, but you will see a lot of sentences of Olaf Scholz, but also of other politicians in Germany saying that we will have to learn not only how we deal with Putin, but how we deal with authoritarian systems generally. That is a start. But you know how the German economy is just super intense bound. So that is a challenge around the corner. But I know that not only, so the reaction of the West, we haven't talked about this, the reaction of NATO being so united on this issue. So if anybody asked me, remember the most asked question on the Munich Security Conference? Do you remember?
I don't know what your most asked question was.
No, most asked question was, what if nothing happens? What if the Russians don't attack? Would the West stand together even if it doesn't happen? I remember that question.
So I didn't hear that much. What I observed in sort of the sessions that I was in was just a tremendous amount of hand-wringing about what Russia might do and what the proportional response should be. But the conversations never really went much further than that. It wasn't, if Russia does this, we do that. If Russia does these two things, we do that. And so what was missing for me was everybody was nervous about what might happen. At that time, people were also talking about a possible exit ramp for Putin.
Yeah.
We've since seen that every time he had an opportunity to take an exit, he accelerated right past the exit ramp, if you will. And I came away from the security conference really feeling like, although it was good to have those conversations, the West was united in spirit, but had not yet figured out what the policy positions were going to be.
And now we're discussing whether to send MiG-29 airplanes which we probably won't at this point, but all the other weapons below that level are delivered now. Germany is trying to buy weapons on the international arms market to send them to Ukraine. But if you look at the sanctions, if you look at the listing of the national bank, that's of an economy of a country that is a nuclear state, having a more or less a business model of exporting energy on the international market, listing the national bank is more or less destroying their economy. And everybody's agreeing on it. The world community more or less agrees on it to do so. I didn't expect that a week before the attack. I did not expect this. And I think, back to your China question, Beijing didn't expect that either. There's a serious debate in the Chinese government of is how close can we get now economically to Russia and strategically to Russia without taking the risk of getting into the sanctions regime of the West. And I think 2 or 3 weeks before the attack, they were pretty sure that they would get around that because nobody expected this super strong reaction. So that might have changed. But it's not only Beijing, it's the neighborhood of Indo-Pacific, which is it is for Germans difficult to really feel it. It's on the other side of the planet. And it's all about China and Volkswagen, not only, but it's about cars and German car industry, maybe some chemical industry, but that's it more or less. But all those other countries, also on the African continent, are watching really intent and projecting that on themselves. How would we react as the West, the guys with the power, economic power, military power, if the door is open to the jungle of those powers, the law of the powerful would, if you could just move borders by force, what does it mean to our world order? So you can think if neighboring states of China would be extremely under pressure if we would just let Russia go with that. And not only them being militarily and security-wise, but also for foreign direct investment, the future, the stability of our global systems. So I like this picture of, we used to have, I learned this in the conference, we used to have two pictures basically of the European theater, which is the transatlantic theater, and the Indo-Pacific theater. And it was really divided up also in the United States. If you look at the State Department, traditionally it is, some guys never met from those two departments, the Asia and the European department for years, has changed a little bit there, also professionalized themselves. But the more you look at Ukraine and the implications on the world community, you see that it's one theater. Not every single power is acting on in all areas of the theater. Germany is not acting in the Indo-Pacific. It's one ship, the Bayern, was with, not like the United States, have a super strong presence in Asia. But it's all interconnected with the expectations of us, the West, taking this serious or not. And so far, we have done super well. The question is, will we continue to do so once the war ended and once we're talking about a future security system, about security guarantees for both Ukraine and Russia? And what would we do, seriously, what would we do as West if there would be some sort of deal between us and Russia and the Ukrainians would oppose? Think of it. We should do everything to prevent that from happening. So more is decided than just Eastern Europe. It's a world issue, by what rules we want to play in the future globally. So that is, the occasion is a catastrophe, but so far we've done better than I would have expected if somebody told me in December that Russia would attack Ukraine. I would have not expected Poland to take in 2 million refugees. I would have expected the UK and the United States not putting us under pressure for Nord Stream 2. Seriously, it was always criticized, but it was, everybody gave us our time, to the right time, say at the very last moment, okay, we cancel this project now. So there's no reason for anybody in the Kremlin to believe that the West will be in parts on this issue ever, as long as they are attacking Ukraine. And that is a advantage to the past. That's an advantage if you compare it to Crimea, if you compare it to Georgia, if you compare it to Syria, the rest is all over the place. In Mali, that is a great advantage.
I could go on, but I want to bring in all of you and I want to bring in our viewers as well. So I'm going to ask an icebreaker question from one of our viewers and give all of you a chance to come up with some questions. Metin, you serve, of course, on the budget committee, and we actually have two questions that have a little bit to do with the priorities of the budget committee. One of our viewers writes, Germany and Europe have made bold medium to long-term strides on energy security and defense spending. However, in the short term, Europe's economies face huge burdens from high energy inflation and war-related trade bottlenecks. Apart from temporary measures to cushion consumers from high fuel prices, would Germany back a substantial additional fiscal expansion in the next few years to support short-term economic growth, both in Germany and in Europe as a whole?
An American asked that question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an American question.
It's a New York question.
Yeah.
I can even tell you.
So it's the old question, but it's a very, very important question. So only because it's old, because you could, when did we have Schwarze Null in German? When did that time start of a balanced budget? The debate is that long. So first of all, we are expanding, just by the way, we are expanding. This 100 billion euros is a fund where we give by law the fund the right to go in debt in the future for 100 billion. So that's and if we don't put it in under Article 115 of the Constitution because of the debt ceiling, which is probably the question about the debt ceiling. We put in an Article 87A, so we have an exception to that. And that's another exception to the exception. The last exception was a COVID stimulus. The other exception was saving towards the financial crisis and the euro crisis. So we are doing it. We are not doing it as much as the obviously not as the United States are doing it. Let's see what the future brings.
Mhm.
Let's see what the future brings.
And then the second viewer question asks or says that there's already we've already started to see some political bickering over how to define support for the Bundeswehr.
Mhm.
And it's, I think, obvious to many people that Germany's procurement system serves as a real obstacle at the moment. But what about increasing the size and quality of the soldiers? Do you think that there will be a mandatory military service in Germany?
I doubt military service. It wouldn't solve our problems now and not in the next 5 or 10 years. That is not our problem. Men is not, or women is not our problem. The amount. It is the technical support for what is there now. To have, as I said before, to have a NATO response force, we should be able to send 13,300 troops. We are legally, we promised that to NATO to be able to do so. We are probably able to do that, but nothing more than that. So it makes a big difference to be able to send 25,000 soldiers on the ground, or 50,000 makes a super big difference. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have a lot of challenges with development and technology in the next round of development, of technical development. Mm-hmm. Of course, the future combat air system combined with France and in Germany and other European partners, it will cost a lot of money. So if you leave that project and other projects in the regular budget of the federal government, you will, with every fiscal year, will have a fight between public transportation, housing, energy, and defense. By having this budget outside the regular budget plan, you will not have that, and that's the big advantage.
So this is sort of a sneaky segue to this room, because my colleague Robin, who's sitting over the corner, submitted a question online, and she wants to know how increasing the military budget fits into Germany's new feminist foreign policy.
I'm not sure that we do have a new feminist foreign policy. But it will change. It will change something. I'm 100% convinced. It's not only because of Mrs. Baerbock, it's because of that generation. And it will change something. Diversity is an issue in economy. It's everywhere. So why not in policy? And I think look at from the German point of view of what is our responsibility to help others. So why did we not go into Syria as an earlier? You remember that debate we had in 2013, 2014 of establishing a no-fly zone over northern Syria. Who knows what had happened if we gotten in? Who knows? The United States say they wouldn't do it, so it was very easy for Germany and for other European countries, of course, not to go by the United States, obviously. But if you, I like the sentence of Annalena Baerbock to say, security is when women feel safe. Is that feminist? Or is that practical? Technically, I wouldn't say it's feminist. I would say it's just a question of policy, of good policy goals. But if you do that, you could end up being pretty active. So you see that everywhere in Germany, in Europe, that more women are taking responsibility and power in governments. And Germany is not really, in the past, it wasn't really an advancement. Olaf Scholz, when I elected him mayor of Hamburg in 2011, he was the first head of state or head of government of the Bundesländer to have a 50% cabinet, men and women. So he is 100% committed on that one. Mm-hmm. Whether that finds a real change in our policy, we'll see.
Katja, can you introduce yourself and
pose your question.
So I'm Katja Donovan. I'm a member of the AICG, but I'm also executive director of 1014. It's another transatlantic organization sponsored by the German government. So far. So I'm just curious. So we saw this tremendous tectonic change, and now this willingness to build this robust security architecture in Germany and Europe, and then supported by the United States. But I'm just wondering, is this going to trigger another thinking of EU enlargement? So if you think if you continue to think that, and that the Russians now, they clearly think in geopolitical spheres of influence, they're trying to enlarge their, real. So what is the thinking in Germany? Sort of, should the EU try to, finally, enlarge and admit the Western Balkan states? Serbia and Turkey, all these states that have applied for a long time now, also Ukraine, of course, and Georgia have applied. Is this just an extension of the security policy to say, okay, we want to be robust and we increase our outreach and our real?
That is, just for the record, Serbia has an election on Sunday. I don't know whether Serbia is a good example. Let's talk about Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, but not Serbia at this point. We have the biggest pro-Russian demonstrations on the street outside Russia. It wasn't Putin might pay his own guys to have big supporting demonstration in Moscow. No, it didn't happen in Moscow. It happened in Belgrade. So our polling says, and polling numbers are saying that this is those demonstrators were bought and paid for it, but still there's a big support for the Russian foreign policy in the Serbian society. Not because they're bad people, because they were just poisoned by propaganda of their own.
Excuse me, could you speak up a bit?
Just because they were poisoned with their own propaganda. So that just one sentence on Serbia. Generally speaking, before we come to the question of Ukraine becoming a member of the European Union, just by the way, was it Article 42, paragraph 7 of the EU treaty is a security issue. It is a defense contract between the members. So if you say Ukraine will not be member of NATO, but member of the European Union, well, you have to defend it anywhere. So we'll see. The easy question is about Western Balkans. We have to, the enlargement process has to be more forcefully on that one, because obviously other forces, not only Russia, but also China, Turkey, others were trying to get in there. So the old arguments are even better now. Ukraine, I'm a member of the German parliament, and I should not go into the trap and telling the Ukrainians not only what to do, but what to want. It could be part of a deal. In theory, it could be part of a deal that Finland does not become a member of NATO. But of course, I am not the one who is supposed to, what the government of Finland is supposed to do. So let's see how we get in this negotiation process with the Russian Federation. And my expectation is, and I hope I'm right, at least for the first step, because the first step would be that the fighting stops. That you have some sort of deal for stopping the war, and then you will have a longer period of conferences, negotiations, bargaining that will take months, if not years, because we are basically renegotiating not only, at least the security system of Europe itself with 3 nuclear powers, the United Kingdom, France, and the Russian Federation, after a war. But as I said, there are implications globally on China as well. So it will be a super big negotiation process. And it could all go out really, really well for us. So getting into disarmament, transparency, all those arguments are on the table. But we are not there yet at this point. So, yeah, sure. No problem. Ukraine can be, I would say, left out of EU. If we get peace in Europe forever for that, great. If the Russian Federation and their government and the government of that country is basically having as a prerequisite a failed Ukraine as not being economically prosperous, not politically democratic, or just a failed state. If that is a prerequisite for a Russian government to survive, then there will be no negotiation, there will be no deal. And it doesn't matter what I say or what the German government says, it just will not happen. So and it could be over years of partisan war in Ukraine. Everybody's aware of that, what's happening. They will not settle for a wrong peace. They will not. I was very impressed by these people. They will, as I just said, who asked the feminist question, I saw women practicing with wooden guns in the park. I do not expect German women so far, even if the Russian tanks will go through Poland at our border to see. There are limits of negotiation at that point. And if all those problems are solved, the question of membership is easy. But if they are not solved, then the membership question doesn't solve anything either. And don't misunderstand me. If Finland gets not attacked but pressured militarily, but I would be suggesting a no-fly zone over Finland immediately within one day, and shooting Russian planes with German planes above Finland tomorrow. We are restructuring the security system of Europe, if not the world. So we've done that in the past, historically, in the last 400 years in Europe. That's the scale. What does it say? So the membership is one. It seemed to be a big question for us for being European.
Well, I just think it could be like an extension. You make your security architecture robust and you increase your area of influence, basically. So I was wondering, because it's obviously very controversial. So to do that.
If Ukraine, put it in technical terms, if Ukraine, seriously, what's the future of the country? It's destroyed. You have millions of refugees. So how do you organize that? If you say our economic benefit of the future would be to have access to the single market. It doesn't matter whether as a member of the European Union, but just for economic reasons, to have access to it, to have some sort of vision of future of getting foreign investment, all that. What is that worth if Russia is not changing on that issue? Nothing. If you have 14,000 dead on the contact line in Lugansk and Donetsk, it doesn't matter whether you have access to the single market. Nobody's going to produce anything. Maybe wheat, okay, but that's it. And honey. You will not rebuild a destroyed economy on that one. So the Russians, we are in a very complex situation at that one, and the membership question is not the most important. And also, the NATO membership is not the most important one. But we have to get armed to the teeth in case Russia is not continues to play by the rules. So don't misunderstand me. This is not a pacifist statement of let's see how things are working out. We have to be super strong on our eastern flank. As long as not fundamental changes happen in the Russian Federation.
So there's another question here in the room.
Hi, my name is Georg Koch. Thank you so much for being here. I help institutional investors around sustainable investing in my day job. And
good.
So I look at the world oftentimes through the lens of ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, or governance topics. So governance caused this, right? Poor governance in Russia. There's a social tragedy, but what's the implication? What I'm asking myself is the implications on the environmental piece, because my initial reaction was, oh boy, this is going to distract us very much from the question how to address climate change. But then there's the energy component, and there was the finance minister's Lindner's comment that renewable energy is freedom energy, which was very interesting for me to hear, because that helps me to reach other parts of the investment community. But I'd be curious, what's your opinion with regards to the very, very important question of climate change? That's very important to this government as well. And how is that impacted by the current crisis?
Excellent question. Good questions don't have simple answers. I have nothing to tell you can use with your investors, but it is complex. From speeding up the process of fighting climate change because of energy independence and just getting even more speed into the system in Germany, and having a global example of benefiting from that even faster could be the game changer. Well, it would have been a game changer also before the war, but now if even faster game changer. To the alternative that you see that right now, the German taxpayer is subsidizing gas. That was not the idea when they signed the coalition treaty of fighting climate change. Let's see how this works out. If Russia decides to have a permanent war on their western side towards NATO, if this is going to be a permanent status, we will have so many economic problems, fundamental economic problems, and at least in Europe, probably on a global scale, that I don't know whether we will have, if we have the wisdom to, even under these circumstances, take the right decisions in transforming our economy, which we should, no question about it. I'm not too sure. But it is responsible politicians in that time should not make that as opposite stories. And even if things go really, really bad, I'll give you one example. Did you see the Canadian Army presentation on the Munich Security Conference on zero emission armed forces? Everybody's sort of laughing about armed forces. Seriously, there is a future to that. So fighting wars, killing people, but not with lower emissions.
Senator, can you?
Yes, with regard to green energy, isn't that also where sanctions come into play? Because a lot of the resources that are necessary for the technology are either in Russia or China. And then also, secondly, have you run stress scenarios of how the effects could ricochet through the global economic and financial system and hurt us, the West?
It's hurting us right now. So the question is how much it's going to hurt us and how long it's going to hurt us. That's basically the question.
Stability, fundamental stability.
Fundamental. I don't feel really stability with inflation at 7 or 8%. I don't consider that stability. But others have, especially Americans, have different opinions on that one. But no, we haven't run stress tests because it's too dynamic at this point. We don't know whether this war is going to continue or not. We don't know if China goes in big time to support. At this point today, as we're talking, China is not delivering weapons to Russia. Think of a world where they do that tomorrow. The United States would, I would say, react with no compromise. And that the dynamic would, I have no idea of how to foresee that dynamic, but it would be economically a super high price we would be paying if China would go that way. Because obviously the United States government does have no room for maneuvering on that one. And it wouldn't be a question of running stress tests, they would just do it. Secondary sanctions on everybody dealing with China, which is also for Germany would be a very, very high price. So no, I can't answer you that question. And I can't answer your question either, but there's those saying, and never waste a crisis to do good things. Well, this is not a crisis. It's a super big catastrophe. So probably if that argument is right, then erst recht. But super dynamic. We don't know whether 5 million refugees or 15 million refugees. We did simple numbers. And you know what that does to the economy of Germany? A lot of kids, schooling, housing, a lot of women coming, less people in the labor force. It turns out probably that Syrian refugees could speak better English than Ukrainian refugees.
Better German or better English?
Better English.
Okay.
It turns out that there were more male in the refugee group of Syrians that could be integrated into the labor market easier than women. Subjectively, obviously some would argue we like Ukrainian refugees more than Syrians, but they are different. Let's see how this works out. So it could, and maybe a lot of those Ukrainian kids stay in Germany and will solve our demographic challenges in the future. But who knows? This is too. I don't have any access on that. We will see. We will see. But the overall goal is stability for Europe. So we are super spoiled with a more or less stable situation. We're very spoiled. You can see that all over the world in areas where in regions where you didn't have that stability. So our first and main goal is to regain that stability. And obviously Russia has to play a part in that. If this government or the country itself does not, it will be super challenging for a long time. And that will decide about the greater economic costs of really greater economic costs long run.
So Jörg, as our host, let me give you the prerogative of asking the last question.
Oh, that's first of all, thanks, Metin. I think that was super, and I probably speak for every one of us, super insightful. Maybe double clicking in the energy sector then, since it seems to be a topic of interest. If you could bring us into the discussions you're having, in particular as well with the different parties at hand. So what kind of scenarios do you see? So there's a topic of gas stop. Shall Germany stop taking the gas from Russia? There's a topic of thinking in the US, which comes up from time to time. I think Elon Musk put it up, nuclear power plants. How can you in Germany put them down? So if you could bring us a little bit into these discussions. You have the Green Party in there, the Liberals in there. So maybe sharing some anecdotes and as well, how do you see it playing out?
Okay, very good question. Anecdotes. Before you go to Elon Musk and Bill Gates and new nuclear power, we do have still 3 nuclear plants that are running at this point, and they are supposed to all get off the grid in this calendar year. So obviously the question is not of rebuilding thorium reactors or anything, but just let those react. So, but obviously the guy who's doing the best job at this point is the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. But the Energy Secretary, Mr. Habeck, I'm impressed by politicians that obviously do something different than they have explained before for good reasoning and making them transparent, because I think that is good governance and sort of connecting to the voters and the public. Which is the only strength we could have versus authoritarian systems. So what he's doing now, he's buying gas worldwide from not so democratic countries, right? So this is basically the worst thing that can happen to a member of the Green Party in their lifetime, okay? So he has to do that because he wants to do something else, which is even worse, not to do that. So that's an alternative. So, they checked whether they should run those nuclear power plants longer. And he came up with the answer, no, for administrative reasons, for technical reasons, for contract, for legal reasons, for all those. And I trust him on that one. I personally voted for, I was one of the guys who'd say, you have to test this. This is a particular, even if it's only 3, 4, or 7% of the energy production of Germany. We have to at least check it whether it's possible or not. But I trust him on that one. Usually, I wouldn't have trusted a member of the Green Party in that answer. But on this one, I trust him because he's traveling to Doha to buy gas. So he's doing things, even if it's not ideologically where he comes from. So probably we won't do that. Probably not for technical reasons. Put it that way. For buying that gas is difficult. It's not only difficult only for Green Party, also for us as Germany. So the deal, probably as a deal, but it is Germany is not buying that gas. German companies are buying that gas. So how does that feel when German representatives of very big companies are trying to buy something for money by price, and the other one is just saying, we will sell, but only if you bring your political leaders to our country for pictures.
Mhm.
Can you imagine how that feels for the business community? And then he did it. And then he did it because it's too serious, because the killing is happening right now in Ukraine. So he did it. But I had him now in several, coming back to your question, in several sessions, he is 100% convinced that the transformation process will be speeded up by this war. I'm not sure whether he's right, but I know that he's 100% committed to do so. And he has a very powerful department for this one, because we designed the department actually, and we designed the budget of the next 4 years for that purpose. So that you will see Mr. Habeck doing a lot of things on that, a lot of action in that, with, I would say, German economy being involved pretty intensively in the next, I would say 4 to 8 years. Let's see how this works. But a lot of people have changed their mind. So I've been talking about the Green Party and nuclear power, talk about my party and Nord Stream 2 and gas. In the relationship between the United States and Germany, it was always a problem of being, after World War II ended, Germany did not invent liberal democracy. It was the United States, it was the United Kingdom and the United States that helped us to get rid of our government that basically blew up the continent. But then for reasons I don't really, which I do understand intellectually, but not politically, we are having a better social welfare system in Germany with less, with American taxpayer paying for our security for the last 60 or 70 years. So that's not a sustainable system on that one. So if this is changing now as well, it could be more sustainable on that one. And of course, this is, are we finished now with the session? Because I want to put one big important issue to it. Imagine,
we're wrapping up. So these are your final thoughts.
Imagine the situation. Okay, I'm in New York now. Imagine February 24th with Donald Trump in the White House. Some would say no, against the Russians, he would react militarily very strongly. Others would say maybe he's just giving a number of a bank account in the United States and just ask us to pay. Otherwise, he wouldn't do anything. What is the trustworthy relationship between that? And what does that make in the calculation of Mr. Putin, knowing that he's president, or in the calculation of Xi Jinping, knowing that not Joe Biden, but Donald Trump even. So this is the best case scenario we have here with those wild regimes in Moscow and China. We have the situation that the Green Party in Germany, the Green Party and the Social Democrats are in government taking responsibility. Imagine this situation, the Green Party and the Social Democrats being in the opposition. What would you think the Green Party would say? Well, buying gas and I just have a suggestion on that one. And imagine Donald Trump would be president of the White House. This would change the calculation in Moscow on a daily basis, and in Beijing as well. Beijing would be supporting now Russia with weapons if Donald Trump would be president of the United States, or if we are in a pretty good situation right now how to react within our camp. But this is not God-given; it could change overnight.
Well, Metin Hakverdi, no need to apologize. I mean, I think this was a fantastic discussion. You had said in your opening remarks that you hoped that we would get to talk a little bit about the future. And during the conversation, you certainly touched a little bit on the future, but I don't think to the degree or to the detail that you really wanted to. So I'm hoping that we can engage in another discussion like this in the not too distant future. And so really on behalf of both ACG and AICGS, I want to thank you for speaking for both of our organizations, both in Washington and here in New York. Jörg and Karen here at Deutsche Bank, I really want to thank both of you for hosting us here, all of us who are here, and for experimenting with us and for testing with us.
This is great.
You're always welcome.
And Rob and our colleague Robin, Robin and our colleague Rob. I know, I don't know what's going on. Robin and our colleague Rob, we had to do some quick fixes yesterday to try to make sure that this worked. And so I think this is a really amazing test. And it's been really exciting. So I really want to thank all of you for joining us here in New York. I want to thank all of our viewers. We had over 80 people tune in. So that was a pretty good number. So altogether, you reached over 100 people. And I think that might even have exceeded your goal. And I look forward to more conversations like this one. So thank you.